Have you ever imagined what it would be like to discover a technology so superior to yours that there was simply no way to compete? In December 1942, in the icy skies of Alaska, Japanese pilots had their first traumatic encounter with something that defied every known law of physics. Captain Yoshio Shiga was leading a formation of 6 Zeros toward the Aleutian Islands when he spotted 2 strange silhouettes approaching at high speed. "They looked like metallic dragons with 2 tails," he later reported. What happened in the next 5 minutes would forever change Japan's perception of aerial warfare. P-38 Lightnings dove from 33,000 feet, a height at which the Zeros could barely operate, attacked with devastating precision, and climbed back up before the Japanese could even maneuver for combat. In less than 2 minutes, 4 Zeros were ablaze in the icy ocean. If you're a fan of world-changing war stories, like this video now and comment below which city you're watching from, so I know where my stories are going. Shiga desperately tried to chase the retreating Lightning, but it was like chasing ghosts. Its top speed of 533 km/h was useless against the P-38's 667 km/h. It was like chasing a Formula One racer on a bicycle. Imagine the sheer frustration of being an experienced pilot and discovering that your aircraft simply doesn't have the physical capability to reach the enemy. How would you feel? What made the P-38 Lightning mathematically impossible for the Japanese to achieve? The answer lay in numbers that simply didn't make sense to Japanese engineering at the time. Prepare to discover how pure mathematics can decide a war before it even begins. Imagine being a Japanese aeronautical engineer in 1942. Looking at P-38 performance data captured in combat. The numbers in front of you simply contradicted everything you knew about aircraft design. It was like discovering someone had invented a car that runs without fuel. Theoretically impossible, but demonstrably real. Let's start with the most basic: operational altitude. While the proud Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 reached its absolute maximum operational ceiling of 10,000 meters, struggling with oxygen starvation and critical performance loss, the P-38 Lightning operated comfortably at 13,400 meters, as if it were its natural environment. This 3,400-meter vertical difference was literally a whole other world of combat. To visualize this advantage, imagine a 340-story building. That's the vertical distance that separated a Lightning at operational altitude from a Zero at its maximum altitude. The Japanese fought on the ground floor while the Americans dominated the sky like gods of war. But let's look at the numbers that truly shocked the Japanese engineers. The Zero's top speed was 533 km/h, 333 luni, under ideal conditions, a respectable performance for 1940. The P-38 Lightning flew at 667 km/h, 417 mph, at the same altitude, a staggering 134 km/h, 84 feet or meter difference. To put this difference into practical perspective, imagine driving down the highway at 80 km/h, 50 mm, trying to catch up with someone going 110 km/h, 70 mm. Simply impossible, no matter how skilled the driver. Can you imagine the utter frustration of a pilot discovering that his aircraft is physically incapable of reaching the enemy, regardless of his skill or courage? The rate of climb revealed even more devastating numbers. The P-38, powered by its 2 1,475 horsepower Allison V1710 engines, totaling 2,950 gross horsepower, climbed at a rate of 24.4 meters per second. The Zero, with its single 940 horsepower Nakajima NK1C Sakai engine, managed a climb rate of just 15.7 meters per second. Let's translate this into real-world combat. In just 1 minute of pursuit, a P-38 could gain 1,700 feet of altitude over any Zero attempting to intercept it. Within 5 minutes, the typical time of an aerial engagement, the Lightning would be 8,000 feet higher than any Japanese pursuer. It was like an escalator rising as the enemy tried to catch up by running up a regular ladder. Operational range was where the math became truly humiliating for the Japanese. The Zero, designed as a regional air superiority fighter, had a range of 1,929 kilometers with auxiliary tanks. Impressive for the time, but the P-38 Lightning flew 2,092 kilometers on internal fuel alone, without auxiliary tanks. With external tanks, The range extended to over 3,300 kilometers. This meant the Lightnings could appear literally anywhere in the vast Pacific, fly extended combat missions, and return to base with fuel to spare. The Japanese lived under constant threat that P-38s might appear, where it was mathematically impossible for them to reach. Confidential Japanese engineering documents captured after the war reveal utter desperation. The report by Lieutenant Colonel Jiro Horikoshi, designer of the Zero, contains a chilling passage. How is it possible to build an aircraft that surpasses ours in speed, altitude, climb, range, and firepower simultaneously? Our calculations indicate that such a combination should be impossible with current technology. The weapons load concentrated in the P-38's nose created another insoluble mathematical problem. 4. 50 Browning machine guns plus a 20mm Hispano cannon firing from a single focal point versus the Zero's two 7.7mm machine guns and two 20mm cannons spread across the wings. The Lightning's concentration of firepower in one point created 300% greater impact density. Think about it. How would you feel if you discovered that no matter how many improvements you make to your equipment, there was something so mathematically superior that it rendered your efforts irrelevant? Fuel range revealed another Japanese impossibility. The Lightning consumed approximately 400 liters per hour in fuel-efficient cruise, allowing for over 8 hours of continuous flight. The Zero, despite being lighter and theoretically more efficient, only managed 6 hours under ideal conditions. How could an aircraft twice as heavy and more powerful achieve greater range? The answer lay in the aerodynamic efficiency of the twin fuselage configuration and the optimization of the Allison engines for high-altitude flight. It was pure engineering overcoming basic physics through superior design. From which city are you watching this video? Comment below and tell me if you've ever faced a situation where you had to quickly adapt to something completely beyond your capabilities, because what I'm about to tell you about the Japanese attempts to deal with the P-38 will show how desperation can lead to decisions that border on the absurd. The Japanese command panicked when it realized its best pilots were completely powerless against the P-38 Lightning. The reaction was a cascade of desperate attempts that revealed not only the Lightning's overwhelming superiority, but also how an entire nation could be forced to abandon decades of military doctrine in a matter of months. Imagine you're a Japanese general receiving daily reports that your best squadrons are being decimated by an aircraft your pilots can barely spot before being shot down. How would you react? The Japanese first response was to try to intercept the Lightnings during their most vulnerable moments. Takeoff and landing. Operation Wounded Eagle was launched in March 1943. The strategy was simple and desperate. Groups of Zeros would attempt to attack American bases precisely at the time of P-38 takeoff, taking advantage of the few seconds when the Lightnings were vulnerable as they gained initial altitude. It was like trying to attack a sleeping lion, theoretically possible, but practically suicidal. The result was catastrophic for the Japanese. In 3 weeks of attempts, they lost 47 Zeros and managed to destroy only 6 P-38s on the ground, none in direct aerial combat. Not only would the Lightnings fly in defensive formations, but their bases in the Pacific were protected by devastating anti-aircraft defenses that turned Japanese attacks into premature kamikaze missions. How would you feel if you discovered that even your best strategy resulted in losses of nearly 8-1 against the enemy? The second attempt was even more desperate and revealing of the Japanese psychological state. The development of the Wounded Dragon Protocol, an official tactic that mandated kamikaze flights specifically targeted against P-38 formations. The logic was brutally simple. If we can't compete technologically, we'll try to destroy them through total sacrifice. Japanese military documents revealed detailed instructions. Pilots were to deliberately ram into P-38s in formation, aiming to destroy at least 2 Lightnings for each Zero killed. Lieutenant Commander Yasuo Kuwahara, who survived one such mission, described in his memoirs, "It was like trying to shoot down a hawk by throwing stones while you yourself are falling off a cliff. Even this extreme tactic failed miserably. The P-38s flew at altitudes and speeds that made kamikaze interceptions nearly impossible. During 6 months of attempts, only 12 Lightnings were destroyed by direct suicide attacks, while the Japanese lost over 200 experienced pilots, a completely unsustainable trade-off. The third strategy demonstrated absolute desperation, frantic attempts to copy or surpass the Lightning's design. The Ki-44 Tojo project was born as a direct response to the P-38, but Japanese engineers faced a brutal reality. They simply lacked the technological base to replicate American capabilities. Chief Engineer Takeo Doi wrote in his confidential technical report, "We have tried to create a high-altitude interceptor capable of competing with the Lightning, but our metallurgy, engines, and aerodynamics are at least 5 years behind American technology. It's like trying to build a skyscraper with carpentry tools." The Ki-44 reached a top speed of only 605 km/h, still 62 km/h slower than the P-38. Its operational ceiling of 11,200 meters was 2,200 meters lower than the Lightning. It was an improvement over the Zero, but still completely inadequate to compete with the Americans. Imagine a situation where you need to improvise solutions to a problem that is completely beyond your technological capabilities. That's exactly how the Japanese felt for 3 years straight. The fourth attempt was perhaps the most pathetic: coordinated swarm tactics. The theory was that multiple Zeros attacking simultaneously from different directions could overwhelm a single P-38. Groups of 8 to 12 Zeros would attempt to surround a single Lightning, leveraging numerical superiority to compensate for technological inferiority. The reality was humiliating. The Lightning simply climbed above Zero's operational range or accelerated out of interception range. Major Saburo Sakai recounted one such attempt. "We were like a pack of wolves trying to chase an eagle. No matter how many of us there were, our prey always escaped to a place we couldn't follow." The fifth and most desperate attempt was the Divine Falcon program. Extreme modifications to existing Zeros to create high-altitude interception capabilities, supercharged engines, improvised pressurized cabins, and even attempts to install booster rockets were included. The results were disastrous. Modified Zeros lost maneuverability, suffered from constant mechanical problems, and still couldn't match even 70% of the P-38's performance. Test pilots reported that the supercharged Zeros were more dangerous to their own pilots than to the Americans. How would you react if you discovered that all your attempts to adapt only confirmed your absolute technical inferiority? The P-38 Lightning not only dominated the skies over the Pacific, it created a new category of air supremacy that the Japanese were never able to break, establishing a legacy of technological inferiority that haunted Japan until the end of the war, and forever redefined how the world understands military dominance through technological superiority. The final statistics are so brutal they seem fictional, but they are meticulously documented in American and Japanese military archives. Of the 1,800 Japanese aircraft confirmed to have been shot down by P-38 Lightnings in the Pacific Theater, fewer than 180 Lightnings were lost in direct aerial combat, a victory ratio of over 10 to 1 that demonstrates not just superiority, but absolute military dominance. To put these numbers into perspective, imagine a soccer league where one team wins every game 10-1 for 3 consecutive years. It's not just a victory. It's such complete domination that it begs the question of whether the rivals should even be in the same league. But the numbers are just the tip of the iceberg. The true legacy of the P-38 lies in its devastating psychological impact, which created a new military medical syndrome. Japanese military hospitals began officially documenting cases of lightning neurosis, a condition in which experienced pilots developed anxiety attacks, uncontrollable tremors, and even auditory hallucinations simply by hearing the distinctive sound of twin Allison engines in distant flight. How would you feel knowing that a war machine has become so dominant that it has created a new category of psychological trauma in experienced fighters? Major Saburo Sakai, one of the greatest Japanese aces of the war with 64 confirmed victories, wrote in his post-war memoirs a confession no samurai warrior should make: "I learned to fear a machine." The Lightning was not only superior, it was invincible within its operational capabilities. It was like fighting ghosts from the future, who knew our every move before we even made them. The psychological transformation was so profound that veteran Japanese pilots with hundreds of combat missions officially refused to fly in areas where P-38s might be operating. Commanders had to develop lightning exclusion zones, geographical areas where Japanese missions were automatically canceled if there was any possibility of encountering P-38s. Imagine the morale impact of an air force that officially has to avoid certain areas of the theater of operations because its pilots have developed a phobia of a specific enemy aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Minoru Genda, considered one of the greatest Japanese naval aviation strategists and the architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, admitted in his classified 1944 report something that shattered decades of Japanese military pride. The P-38 Lightning does not merely represent American technological superiority. It represents our complete inferiority in design, production, and industrial capability. We are not fighting an aircraft. We are fighting a superior technological civilization. The most pathetic and revealing attempt at a Japanese response was the Ki-83 project, an experimental fighter deliberately configured to resemble the Lightning. When it finally flew in March 1945, tests revealed performance barely reaching 85% of the capabilities of a 1942 P-38, 3 years older. It was like building a replica of a modern car that performs worse than the original model from years ago. Japanese engineers never fully grasped how the Americans had solved the fundamental problems of the twin fuselage design. Captured technical documents revealed desperate attempts at reverse engineering that repeatedly failed because the Japanese lacked the necessary metallurgical and engineering foundation. Think about it. An entire nation with a centuries-old tradition of metallurgy and precision craftsmanship discovered that it could not replicate enemy technology, even though it had captured examples for detailed study. The strategic impact extended far beyond aerial combat. The absolute dominance of the P-38 forced the Japanese to completely abandon their doctrine of offensive air supremacy, adopting a defensive posture that fundamentally contradicted samurai military philosophy. They stopped trying to control the sky and began simply trying to survive in it. The cultural influence was equally profound. Post-war Japanese veterans interviewed decades later still described the P-38 with a mixture of almost religious respect and residual terror. It was a machine that had shattered not only their air force but also their national confidence in Japanese technological prowess. How would you feel about discovering that there is a technology so superior to yours that it not only defeats your best efforts, but makes you question your fundamental competence as a civilization? The P-38 Lightning's ultimate legacy transcended World War II. It proved that concentrated technological superiority can be more decisive than numbers, courage, or military tradition. It established the template for modern aerial dominance, where absolute quality trumps relative quantity. Japanese veterans coined a specific term that exists in no other military culture: Lightning Gaku, literally the learning of lightning, referring to the humbling knowledge that technology exists so superior that it makes resistance not only futile, but potentially suicidal. If you enjoyed this story of technological supremacy that redefined modern warfare, how about videos on how American radar made Japanese fighters instantly obsolete, the F-4U Corsair the Japanese called Whistling Death, or why the B-29 was literally untouchable to Japanese interceptors? Let us know in the comments which of these stories of technological dominance you'd like to see next. If you want more fascinating stories about how superior technology can decide entire conflicts before the first battles even begin, be sure to subscribe to the channel now and hit the bell so you don't miss a thing. Share this video with a friend who needs to understand how advanced engineering can humiliate entire nations.